everybody, Invisiblekatana here. Today I would like to discuss gaming gimmicks. So just to get it right off the top here, we're talking things like haptic feedback for controllers, the Kinect, those sorts of things. The reason that I ended up doing this episode, or the inspiration for this, was, as usual, I'm just like, crap, I need to come up with something. And I just happened to be looking at an Xbox controller, and instantaneously, that led me to think of PlayStation and haptic feedback, because of course that's kind of the newest gimmick I'd say we have. And some people like it, some people don't. Personally, I'm a pretty big fan of it. I'm not like losing my mind if a game doesn't have it, or if I have, a perfect example, honestly, is like with all the, all the remasters and everything that we've been getting as of late. Each one, if it's a PlayStation game, is like, hey, it's an official PS5 version. I mean, technically, they've been doing that since, since 2020, actually, or 2021, because that's when the Ghost of Tsushima version came out, and that was like the first thing where it was like, oh, it's a director's cut instead of calling it like a remaster and stuff. And that was the same thing where it was like, hey, now you can do haptic feedback, and it's like, I love that game. I would love to experience haptic feedback in Ghost of Tsushima, but I love Ghost of Tsushima. Like, any little addition to that game would be absolutely amazing. And it's just an interesting little idea where it's like, man, I would love to have that personally, because one day I want to go through the game again, maybe this year, before the sequel comes out. And it's like, I would kind of love to have the haptic feedback. I think that would be pretty cool. And then you have other games where it's like, The Last of Us Part 2 remaster came out, and that's the official PS5 version. But do I really care to have haptic feedback? It's like, like, it's fine. I love that game without it. So it's like, for me, and it's super tricky when it comes to guns, where it's like, it's not like it's going to be that difficult where it's like, oh my god, I have to put so much tension on this to pull the trigger. It's like, it's not like that. It's not that serious. But it's little stuff like that where it is interesting. It depends on the game if I care or not. I happen to have it because I did want to get the extra mode that they had, and also the additional photo mode feature, so I got the haptic feedback with it. But for Ghost of Tsushima, it's kind of a different story where paying for the upgrade for Ghost of Tsushima is honestly only for haptic feedback. Like, even back in the day when that first came out, it was like, if you look at Digital Foundry stuff, it was like, yeah, this isn't really worth it. Like, the graphics don't really look that updated, even for being a technical PS5 version. And same goes with what's the new Days Gone. Love that game, absolutely love that game. I'm pretty sure it has haptic feedback. I'm just assuming that because it's an official PS5 version. But graphically speaking, that game technically looks worse. If you buy the PS5 version instead of just playing the PS4 version on the PS5, the PS4 version actually looks better. It's actual 4K 60. And then somehow the PS5 version is worse, which really sucks, because I wanted to get that for like the new Horde mode and new photo mode features. And it's like, oh, well, I don't want an uglier game, because that actually kind of matters to me. But either way, that's just a little thing to touch on when it comes to haptic feedback, especially now with the way it can be implemented as the newest gaming gimmick that we really have, because of how it's jumping into games where it never had it before. It makes a huge difference compared to some of the other things we've had in the past, where it's like, okay, well, if you don't buy this thing, it's like its own separate thing. Like, buying the Kinect was, well, technically it wasn't its own thing when the Xbox first came out, and then it was failing like crazy, and they were like, well, if you want to buy it, you can buy it separately now, and we'll shave off when they got rid of that, wasn't it like almost $150 less for the whole console? Like, they took off like a huge chunk of money when they're like, okay, Kinect is failing and nobody wants this tied in, we'll just make it its own separate thing. And it was like, here you go. It was like, they cut off like a big chunk of money when they got rid of that bundle, where it was like, you have to have Kinect when you buy this console. But the Kinect, I would definitely say, was a big gaming gimmick. And gaming gimmicks, I should say this, it doesn't mean that the game has to be a failure, or whatever it is has to suck in order for it to be a gimmick. Even successful things can still be gimmicks. Like I said, I personally enjoy the haptic feedback. Doesn't mean it's not a gimmick. I mean, let's be honest, they had that. Before that was the touchpad, and before that was 6-axis control. Wasn't the biggest fan of 6-axis, if we're being totally honest. I know it was a big thing, like gyro controls. I'm sure it was great for layer, which I never played, and nobody ever really did anyway. But I can tell you, using the gyro controls 6-axis to throw a grenade in Uncharted 1, not my favorite. Not my favorite. I was glad they got rid of that. I don't know if that's in the remastered version on PS4 or anything like that. But it's like, oh yeah, I'm not losing my mind about this. Like, I don't need this. This doesn't really do much for me. Doing it, controlling, I don't know, it was like arrows or something in like Heavenly Sword. I was like, that was so effing long ago. I can't really remember what you used the 6-axis for, but you used it for something. It was in there. It was on the PS3. Like, hey, 6-axis, everybody. It's cool, right? Like, it should have been. It should have been way cooler if we're being honest. I mean, the Wii comes out and that's basically just motion control. That's the whole point of that, and it worked perfectly. But it was like the heart of the console, like the actual console itself was motion controls. And then when it came to Sony with the 6-axis, it was like, yeah, this is just a gimmick, and it felt way more awkward than it should have. Or at the very least, it would be weird stuff like, okay, I'm just tilting my controller up and down, because once again, I'm throwing a grenade in Uncharted 1. Or I'm using, the motion controls when he's like balancing on a beam and you got to keep the controller steady. I'm okay with that. That one's like a simple one, like, okay, you do a little balance beam act, but lifting it up and down for the arc of your grenade is like, that just felt weird. Like, it just felt awkward. So I was glad they took that out in the second game. But I remember 6-axis not being the biggest thing in the world for me personally, and I have no connection to the Kinect beyond, I don't know. If I'm being completely honest, I may or may not have played it twice, 2 or 3 times I may have used the Kinect in my life, if we're being totally honest, and that's once again probably at conventions a million years ago. So I never had any connection to that or anything like that. But definitely those big gaming gimmicks. The Virtual Boy, I don't know if I want to count it as a gimmick just because it failed, because Nintendo was doing like 100 million things. So I don't know if that counts as a gimmick, because it did what it was meant to do. It was just so early in the virtual reality space that it was, searing your eyes with red. And then it was like, okay, we can't really, this ain't working like we thought it was gonna work. So I don't know if I can count that as a gimmick. They were actually trying virtual reality in a new way. Well, in general, they were trying virtual reality, and it just happened not to work. So I don't know if I really want to count that as a gimmick, because I don't count the PlayStation VR as a gimmick. Like, VR as a whole, I don't consider like a gaming gimmick. That's why I'm thinking like smaller scale stuff. The Kinect, even though that was admittedly large scale, I consider that to be a gimmick, because it was like, hey, that was a heck of an era, especially with the way things are right now. That's an era that has been brought up as of late with Nintendo and, currently Microsoft as well. Or it was just a very specific era of, this is a gaming console, but it's not really tapping, you guys aren't really tapping into the gaming aspect of it. They were very hardcore on like the multimedia essence of it all. And the Kinect was definitely a part of that. I mean, heck, I still remember the first time it was shown off, and it was like shown off as like a very kids game thing, where it was like the little kids came out and they were like playing with the animals and stuff. And I'm like, this is a horrible first example of utilizing your body to play a video game. Like, I'm pretty sure that had to have been on E3 stage, of course. And it's like, no offense, but it's like, this technology is far superior to what you were showing me right now. And somehow that's all we ever got. It was just those gimmicky games. Wipeout, I think, was one of the games where you actually use like your avatar and stuff. And it was just mini games and, hitting dodgeballs and, river rapids and crap like that. And it just never really did anything. It was like, they made it. And the main reason I consider that to be more of a gimmick than just, kind of like the PlayStation VR, like an actual product, is because, for one, they didn't really support it very much. Like, Microsoft themselves kind of just made it to be like, whatever. And then that was it. It was like, they didn't even put anything out that, I could be wrong based on my, gaming knowledge and history of being a giant nerd, even though I never bought it. But if I'm not mistaken, did they not put out a single game that was a Microsoft-owned game? Like, maybe some of those gimmicky games were, maybe, that was a Microsoft Studios Wipeout game or whatever. The adventure game they had may have technically been Microsoft Studios. But other than that, did they make anything themselves? Did they do a single thing with that was theirs? I think, because technically Harmonix was like the only company. What was that? Dance Central was the name of that game. And they got like 2 of those out before, like the console died off, or, the peripheral died off. And it's like, they were the only ones really doing it. It was them, and like I said, the little Wipeout game and like the kiddie game. I think both of those may have actually been Microsoft games, like Microsoft Studio games. But they never made anything that was like a Kinect Halo experience. I know that there was some stuff there where it was like, voice things, because the Kinect could do like 100 million different things. But outside of voice crap, where it was like, hey, you're playing Mass Effect or something, it's like, hey, go over there. Outside of voice stuff, they didn't do anything. They implemented it because you have a big effing, nearly $200 microphone, just sitting in front of you. You might as well be able to talk to it in a bunch of games. So there were tons of games that did that, but it was like, I don't think Microsoft did anything with that, like at all. And it's just crazy. Like, and you had to have it, when the console first came out, you had to have the with the Xbox, and then nobody liked it, and so then they had to cut it and make it a separate thing, and you kind of refine it to make it look a little slimmer and better later on. But they just never did anything with it. That, more than anything, I feel is kind of what makes it a bit of a gimmick, is that you didn't even do anything with it when you're the ones who made it. Like, this will revolutionize things, and then they put out like 2 games themselves, which are more like silly, pick up and play for like 5 to 10 minute type of games, and then that was it, and it was up to everybody else. And then you had, like I said, Dance Central and whatever that Star Wars one was, that was basically Dance Central but Star Wars, and super weird. Although I think it had other actual Star Wars stuff in it. That was just one of the modes, was basically a Dance Central mode. But definitely the Kinect, I consider like one of the biggest gimmicks that we've had. It might be the biggest one, if I'm being totally honest. That might be the one that I consider like the biggest gimmick we've ever had in gaming, simply due to the fact that it wasn't utilized even by the people that made it. Like I said, they made like 2, I'm sure they made more than 2 games, but there wasn't like a Halo Kinect game, there wasn't a Gears Kinect game, there wasn't like anything where I think this is Xbox, this is a Kinect, and now they blended the 2 things together, So I'm not sure what the deal was with that. It was a great concept, could have done 100 million things, but it didn't. It just didn't do, it felt like it didn't do anything. But definitely a huge thing that I consider to be like I said, probably the gaming gimmick. But of course, if we're talking gaming gimmicks during the Kinect era, gaming gimmicks coming out with motion and this, that, and the other, simply due to the fact that the Wii was blowing everybody's brains away, I have to talk about the PlayStation Move. I also had to take a drink of water because for some reason my throat is super dry and I'm dying right now. Refreshing. Anyway, the PS Move, once again, one of those E3 memories I still have, where they have like the random open blue space and they had a dude fighting like a skeletons with swords and shields. I was like, okay, you get the motion controls. And I will definitely say this right off the top, I think PlayStation did better than Xbox did. Once again, didn't buy it, never owned it myself, but I felt like the PS Move actually continued for a very long time. Like, technically, I think the PS Move went into like the PS4 era. I think they did it until they made PSVR, and then that was like the official transition where it was like, hey, we're moving away from the PS Move, and basically if you still want the motion controls and stuff like that, now it's all morphed into our VR thing. So you get PS Move, upgrade it, and all the controls you have there with the new VR controllers, but also you're going into the realm of just virtual reality. But the PS Move was legit. It was like, hey, you can buy, I guess adding peripherals doesn't count for much, but it was like, hey, you can buy these little guns if you want to play Killzone and stuff like that. The Wii had a bunch of those peripherals too, just to, point the Wiimotes and stuff, which I did use. We had one of those back in the day when I was playing like Dark Side Chronicles and stuff. I think we actually had 2 of them, if I'm not mistaken. We either had 1 or 2. I think we had 2, and I would just play 2 players by myself and just have them like in the controller and just be dual wielding like crazy. Good times for sure. But when it comes to the PS Move, like I said, I felt like they actually utilized that over multiple, well, only 2 generations, but they used it for quite a long time. And PlayStation, starting with, what was that, the PlayStation the iToy, that thing, definitely a gimmick from back in the day, the earliest, I think, concept of doing that kind of thing. But definitely is stuff that they utilized, and they kept it going for a while using like the iToy and all the silly different games with that, and then once again transitioning even further. And you can still, if I'm not mistaken, the PlayStation cameras that they had were also utilized with the PlayStation Move. Obviously we're not talking like the PlayStation iToy from PS2, but when they made like new cameras, I'm pretty sure they made one for the PS3. Of course, there's cameras you could buy for the PS4, which are like, streaming cameras and stuff, but I do think you could use some of those for games as well if they had those features included. But the PS Move, it started off simple. It's like, hey, everybody's doing motion controls because of the Wii. And it was that sword and shield thing. I'll never forget it. And then it was like, okay, implement it through some of their earlier VR games, of course. like with the first PlayStation VR, I think I think the move was with the first PSVR. I think it was PSVR 2 is when they changed all of that into the new like white controllers that match the headset and everything. So I think with the first PlayStation VR, it was the original, well, maybe not the original move controllers. They were probably like the updated versions, but I think they had like 2 generations of move controllers, and the second generation was what they used with the very first PSVR, if I'm not mistaken. So they really used those things way longer than I would have expected, if we're being totally honest. Like everyone was, everyone being Sony and Microsoft, of course, like, hey, look at the Wii, let's do that. But I think it's easy to say like, all right, well, it's not like PlayStation went gangbusters with it and like sold billions upon billions of move controllers, but they did a lot with it when you really think about how long they transitioned that from PS3 to PS4, and then eventually transitioning it into a whole new thing where it's like, here's the technology we have for motion controls over all of these different games, utilizing it for, I can't even think of the Sackboy, Little Big Planet, there it is. They killed him off and it wiped it from my memory. But from Little Big Planet, you could use the PS Move controllers. That was kind of a big thing. Also, just controlling those games. I think Media Molecule was like, this will definitely help people make the levels a lot easier. And that was a big part of it. Like, hey, you have the motion controls, you can control the game with that. But also, if you're making levels, you can just swing the thing around and it's like a cursor, and it makes it a lot easier to just like make materials and kind of make the curves and design of the level that you want. And I remember that being kind of a big deal, like, oh, that would be so much easier, because I was actually making levels back then. And I was like, man, that would actually be kind of cool. But that was literally it. That was the only use that I personally saw, because I was like, I'm not going to buy these other VR games. I don't have Killzone. I'm not going to use it for like the first person motion controls and stuff like that. But the PSVR or the PS Move, as much as that was a gimmick, I think they utilized it fairly well. And then, like I said, they literally transitioned that tech into PSVR. And I was like, all right, well, we're done with the Move, but we want to keep that technology going forward. Let's go with PSVR 2, and then we'll take all of that, and then it just becomes its own thing. Because admittedly, I'm sure they weren't getting a lot of sales where, once again, it was like, hey, buy these little Move controllers just for Little Big Planet. Buy these little Move controllers just for like this one thing over here. So then it was like, all right, we'll just make all that technology into its own brand new thing, and then boom, PSVR 2, and it's all kind of in the one bundle. All that technology is now transitioned into the next phase of what they're trying to do. And of course that leads to, the PlayStation VR and stuff like that, which, like I said, I think VR is its own different thing where you can call it a gimmick. I think I can totally understand anyone's argument saying like, well, VR is definitely a gimmick. 3D TVs, I think most people would say definitely a fad or a gimmick. I'll never forget playing, what was that, Odyssey to the West? And they literally had 3D TVs like in the game, and this is a post-apocalyptic game, and one of the characters, like Monkey, asked the main character, it was like, oh, what are these? And she was like, oh, that's just some stupid fad that humans had a while ago. And that was like in the craze of the 3D era, and they were totally right. Super ironic though, because they did have DLC that was also 3D, which I thought was super funny. It was like they made DLC and it was 3D DLC, so I thought that was really funny. But they were right, that became a fad. And that had way less to do with games, but of course, because it was 3D TVs, lots of games had it. I still remember playing Batman, the first Batman, when that came out with Arkham Asylum on at least the PS3 version. I don't know if every version had it, but PS3 had it, and I had my glasses and stuff, and you could, switch it on, and it was literally color glasses. I still have those things too. And it was like, it looks 3D though. It looks pretty good. So, definitely went through that era for sure. That was definitely, I feel like, and it's such an interesting thing. Obviously, it's up to everyone how they want to decide, a fad versus a gimmick. But I thought that was more of a fad than it was a gimmick, because I consider a gimmick being the Kinect and being the PS Move, mostly because it was like they only did that because someone else did it. That's why I consider that like a bit of a gimmick, or something really small scale where it was like they just kind of made this for no good reason. But it's kind of cool. Like I said, the motion controls, as far as 6 axes are concerned, and then even now with like DualSense and stuff, like it's a little gimmick. You can turn that off. Some people don't like it even, but it's either a small thing or something that was solely made to try to capitalize on something else someone was doing, which once again could go into the same element of just being a fad of the time. But I don't think going into motion controls was really a fad. I think that was just, like I said, I consider that more of a gimmick because that's not what they were doing. But motion controls, as we have clearly seen, still work. They still have a place in society. Obviously, technically VR games are motion controls. So it's all there. Of course, everyone's opinion is valid on that. I would say, determining what's a gimmick versus a fad. But I would love to know your thoughts on that. But in general, I think those are definitely some of the good ones to really talk about. There's a million things Nintendo did back in the day, obviously, outside of VR, the Power Glove, like 100 million things that you could consider like little gimmicks and just trying to advance technology and things like that. But I think, as far as I'm concerned, when we go with gimmicks, I think the ones I talked about are definitely the ones that stick out the most for me personally. Probably just, obviously the gaming era that I was in during that time when it was all kind of coming up as the new thing. That's why those stick out the most. And of course, the most recent things being, like motion control or, haptic feedback and stuff. Although, I don't know if I call it a gimmick. It's just almost an update to design and things. But back pedals have gone crazy lately. Wouldn't really call it a gimmick, just a new addition. I wish all controllers did have those. That would be sick if like the next generation of consoles. They might as well do it. They're gonna charge us who knows how many thousands of effing dollars for digital only consoles next generation. They're gonna F us over for sure. We better start getting to the point where it's like, okay, I can't have physical games. You better give me some effing back pedals or something, like 2 extra buttons just on the back. We should just start getting that in general for our suffering that is sure to come. Horrible, sad way to end this, but life is life. It is what it is. I want to know what gimmicks you guys have that are either good or bad. Just gimmicks in general, like the first ones that come to mind when it comes to gaming. No matter what it is, I would love to know what gimmicks you've recognized throughout, our nerdy little history of consoles and just how things have worked out. So please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.